Sometimes the most ordinary days become the most extraordinary memories. What started as a simple act of kindness on a dusty ranch road would spiral into a mystery that challenged everything one man believed about trust, family, and the secrets people carry. When Marcus Thompson stopped to help a stranded stranger on that scorching summer afternoon, he thought he was just being neighborly. He had no idea he was about to uncover a truth that would shake the foundation of his quiet life and force him to question whether some strangers are really strangers at all. The desert keeps its secrets well, but sometimes, just sometimes, those secrets find their way to your doorstep, whether you're ready or not. The sun hung mercilessly over the Arizona desert, turning the asphalt into a shimmering river of heat waves. Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his pickup truck down the lonely stretch of highway that led to his ranch. The radio crackled with static, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence of the afternoon. After 37 years of life, with the last 15 spent working this unforgiving land, Marcus had grown accustomed to solitude. His ranch sat 40 miles from the nearest town, a deliberate choice he had made after his divorce 5 years earlier. The Broken Arrow Ranch, as the weathered sign at the entrance proclaimed, sprawled across 800 acres of scrubland and rocky terrain. It wasn't the most productive land in Arizona, but it was his. Every sunrise brought the same routine: check the water systems, tend to the small herd of cattle, maintain the fences, and try to coax life from soil that seemed determined to resist his efforts. The work was hard and mostly thankless, but it provided something Marcus valued above all else: peace. That peace was about to be shattered. As Marcus rounded a bend in the road, about 3 miles from his ranch entrance, he spotted something unusual. A figure sat beside a broken-down sedan, its hood raised like a white flag of surrender. The car appeared to be an older model Honda. Its paint faded to an indeterminate color somewhere between beige and gray. Steam rose from its engine, creating ghostly wisps in the desert heat. The person beside it was a woman, Marcus realized as he drew closer. She sat on a small suitcase, her head in her hands, the picture of defeat. Marcus slowed his truck and pulled over. He had been raised to help people in need, a value instilled by his grandmother who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Never pass by someone who needs help, she used to say. You never know when you might be the one sitting on the side of the road. Those words had guided him through life, even when that life had taken unexpected turns. Stepping out of his air-conditioned truck was like walking into an oven. The heat hit him with physical force, and he immediately felt his shirt begin to stick to his back. The woman looked up at his approach, shielding her eyes from the sun with her hand. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and worry. Her clothes were simple but clean: jeans, a blue cotton shirt, and worn sneakers. Car trouble? Marcus asked, though the answer was obvious. The woman stood, brushing dust from her jeans. The engine just started making terrible noises about 20 minutes ago, then it just died. Her voice carried a slight accent that Marcus couldn't immediately place. I'm afraid I don't know much about cars. Marcus nodded toward his truck. I've got some tools. Mind if I take a look? Relief flooded the woman's face. Oh, would you? That would be wonderful. I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Martinez. Marcus Thompson. He shook her offered hand, noting her firm grip and the calluses that suggested she was no stranger to manual work. Let's see what we're dealing with here.
Marcus peered under the hood of the Honda, immediately identifying the problem.
The radiator had developed a significant leak and the engine had overheated badly. The smell of burning coolant filled his nostrils, and he could see that several hoses had also suffered damage from the heat. It wasn't the kind of repair that could be made on the side of the road. I'm afraid it's not good news, he told Sarah, wiping his hands on a rag he kept in his truck. Your radiator's gone, and from the looks of it, the engine may have sustained some damage from overheating. This car isn't going anywhere today. Sarah's shoulders sagged. I was afraid of that. She glanced around at the empty landscape stretching in all directions. Is there a tow truck service around here? Or maybe a bus? Marcus almost smiled at the question. The nearest bus stop was probably 100 miles away, and the only tow truck service operated out of Copper Falls, which was 40 miles north and not known for quick response times. Not exactly. This isn't the most populated area. Where were you heading? I was trying to get to Tucson, Sarah said. I have a job interview there tomorrow morning. I've been driving for 2 days and this was supposed to be the last stretch. She looked at the car with frustration and disappointment. Marcus found himself studying Sarah more carefully. There was something about her story that didn't quite add up. Most people traveling through this area were either locals who knew the roads or tourists who stuck to the major highways. This particular stretch of road led mainly to his ranch and a few other remote properties. It wasn't a logical route to Tucson from anywhere. "Where did you start your drive?" he asked casually. "Colorado. Denver, actually." Sarah seemed to realize the same thing Marcus had. "I know this seems like an odd route, but I was trying to avoid the interstate traffic. I hate driving on busy highways." The explanation was plausible, though it would add significant time and distance to the journey. Marcus decided not to press the issue. Maybe Sarah was just one of those people who preferred back roads, or maybe she had her reasons for avoiding main thoroughfares. Everyone had a right to their privacy. "Well, you can't stay out here," Marcus said, making a decision that would change both their lives. "The nearest town is Copper Falls, and it's 40 miles. My ranch is just up the road." "You're welcome to use my phone to call for help, and you can wait there while you figure out what to do." Sarah hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing her options. A lone woman accepting help from a strange man in the middle of nowhere was not without risks. But the alternative was remaining stranded in the desert with limited water and no shelter from the brutal sun.
"That's very kind of you,"
she said finally.
"I don't want to impose, but I don't see many alternatives. No imposition at all."
"I don't get much company out here." They gathered Sarah's belongings from the car, a single suitcase, a small backpack, and a worn leather purse. Marcus was struck by how little she was traveling with for someone who had driven from Denver. Most people moving across states had cars packed with possessions. Sarah's sparse luggage suggested either a very short trip or someone who was used to traveling light. The drive to Marcus's ranch took only a few minutes, but it gave him time to observe his unexpected guest. Sarah sat quietly, looking out at the landscape with what seemed like genuine interest rather than the usual dismay that city people showed when confronted with the harsh beauty of the desert. She asked intelligent questions about the local flora and fauna, displaying a knowledge that surprised him. "You seem to know quite a bit about desert ecology," Marcus commented as they turned onto his property. "I've lived in different places," Sarah replied. "You picked things up along the way." The Broken Arrow Ranch House was a modest single-story structure built of adobe and wood, designed to withstand the desert climate while remaining comfortable for its inhabitants. Marcus had expanded it over the years, adding a larger kitchen and a guest room that rarely saw use. The house sat on a slight rise, providing views of the surrounding landscape and the distant mountains. As they pulled up to the house, Sarah admired the property. "It's beautiful," she said, and Marcus could hear the sincerity in her voice. "How long have you lived here?" 15 years. Bought it after my divorce. Needed somewhere to think." Marcus parked the truck and helped Sarah with her luggage. "Come on, let's get you inside where it's cool." The interior of the house was a welcome relief from the heat. Marcus had invested in good insulation and efficient air conditioning, understanding that comfort in the desert was not a luxury but a necessity. The living room was simply furnished but comfortable, with leather furniture that had aged well and a stone fireplace that provided warmth during the surprisingly cold desert winters. "Make yourself comfortable," Marcus said, gesturing toward the couch. "I'll get you something to drink. Water, iced tea, beer." "Iced tea sounds wonderful, thank you." While Marcus busied himself in the kitchen, Sarah explored the living room with her eyes. The walls displayed a collection of photographs that told the story of Marcus's life. Pictures of him in military uniform suggesting service in the army. Photos of him with a woman who must have been his ex-wife. Images of the ranch during different seasons. There were also several books scattered around, indicating that despite his remote location, Marcus was not a man who had abandoned learning. "Here you go," Marcus said, returning with a tall glass of iced tea. "The phone's over there if you want to make your calls." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully, taking a long sip before moving to the phone. She dialed directory assistance first, getting numbers for towing services and car rental companies. Her first few calls were not encouraging. The towing service could not reach her car until the following afternoon, and even then, repair would take several days. The car rental companies had no vehicles available for immediate pickup in Copper Falls. "This is not working out well," Sarah said, after hanging up from her fourth unsuccessful call. "I'm starting to think the universe doesn't want me to get to Tucson tomorrow." Marcus had been listening to her calls while preparing lunch in the kitchen. "What kind of job interview is it?" he asked. "Maybe you could postpone it a day or two." "It's for a teaching position at a community college," Sarah said. "Environmental science. They're interviewing several candidates this week, so rescheduling might mean losing the opportunity entirely." The mention of environmental science sparked Marcus's interest. It would explain Sarah's knowledge of desert ecology and her apparent comfort with rural settings. What's your background in environmental science? I have a master's degree in ecology and 15 years of teaching experience, Sarah replied. Though recently I've been working more in consulting and fieldwork. There was something in the way she said recently that suggested a story behind it, but Marcus didn't probe. Everyone had transitions in their lives, career changes that sometimes involve difficult circumstances.
You know? Marcus said,
bringing Sarah a sandwich he had prepared. Tucson is only about 2 hours from here if you have reliable transportation.
I need to go into town tomorrow anyway.
I could drive you. Sarah looked surprised by the offer. That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. It's not a problem. I was planning to pick up some supplies, and Tucson has better prices on some things I need. We could leave early, get you to your interview, and I could do my shopping while you're busy. The offer was practical and would solve Sarah's immediate problem, but Marcus could see her struggling with accepting such help from a virtual stranger. In his experience, people who were reluctant to accept help usually had good reasons, either from pride or from circumstances that made them wary of depending on others. Are you sure it wouldn't be too much trouble? Sarah asked finally. No trouble at all. Besides, it'll be nice to have some company for the drive. That evening, as the sun began to set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Marcus and Sarah sat on the front porch of the ranch house. The temperature had dropped to a more comfortable level, and a slight breeze carried the scents of sage and desert flowers. Sarah had proven to be excellent company, with a broad range of knowledge and a dry sense of humor that Marcus found refreshing. I can see why you chose this place, Sarah said, watching the colors change across the landscape. There's something almost spiritual about it. That's exactly what drew me here, Marcus agreed. After the chaos of military life and then the complications of marriage, I needed somewhere that made sense. Out here, problems are usually straightforward. If something's broken, you fix it. If something needs attention, you give it attention. It's honest work in an honest place. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes simplicity is the greatest luxury. They talked until the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, sharing stories about their lives without delving too deeply into personal details. Marcus learned that Sarah had grown up in various places due to her father's work, which explained her adaptability and broad knowledge. Sarah learned about Marcus's military service and his struggles to readjust to civilian life, which had ultimately led him to the healing solitude of the ranch. When they finally went inside for the night, Marcus showed Sarah to the guest room and provided her with fresh towels and anything else she might need. As he prepared for bed in his own room, he reflected on how much he had enjoyed having someone to talk with. Solitude had its benefits, but he had forgotten how pleasant good conversation could be. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah lay awake in the guest room for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with a decision that would affect both of their lives. She had not been entirely truthful about her circumstances, and every moment of Marcus's kindness made her feel worse about the deception. But some secrets were too dangerous to share, and some truths could put innocent people at risk. Outside, the desert night settled over the ranch with its ancient silence, keeping watch over two people whose lives had intersected by chance, but whose futures were about to become more intertwined than either could imagine. The first chapter of their story was ending, but neither realized that the real story was just beginning. The pre-dawn darkness of the desert carried a chill that would seem impossible to anyone experiencing the afternoon heat. Marcus rose at 5:30, his usual time, and moved quietly through the house to avoid waking Sarah. The coffee maker gurgled to life as he stood at the kitchen window, watching the eastern horizon for the first hints of sunrise. This was his favorite time of day, when the world seemed full of possibilities and the harsh realities of desert life were temporarily softened by the gentle light. He was surprised to find Sarah already awake when he knocked softly on her door at 6:30. She emerged fully dressed, her hair neatly arranged, looking as though she had been up for some time. "Good morning," she said quietly. "I hope I didn't wake you moving around." "Not at all. I'm an early riser by habit. Coffee? Please. And thank you again for doing this. I know it's a lot of trouble." Marcus handed her a mug of coffee and studied her face in the morning light. Sarah looked tired, with the kind of fatigue that suggested worry rather than lack of sleep. Dark circles under her eyes hinted at a restless night, and there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there the evening before. "Everything all right?" he asked. Sarah managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just nervous about the interview, I suppose. It's been a while since I've been through this process. They left the ranch as the sun crested the horizon, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber. The drive to Tucson would take them through some of the most beautiful country in Arizona, past towering saguaro cacti and dramatic rock formations that looked like ancient sculptures against the brightening sky. For the first hour, their conversation was easy and natural. Sarah asked about the various plants and geological features they passed, and Marcus found himself enjoying the role of tour guide. She had an infectious curiosity about everything she saw, from the roadrunner that darted across their path to the red-tailed hawk circling overhead. "You really do know this area well," Sarah observed as Marcus pointed out a family of javelinas foraging near a wash. 15 years of exploring will teach you a lot. I've hiked most of this country, sometimes just to get away from my own thoughts." Marcus glanced at her. "What about you? You seem pretty comfortable with rural settings for someone who's been living in cities." Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring out at the passing landscape. "I grew up in small towns, mostly. My father was a geologist, so we moved around a lot following his work. I learned to appreciate wild places early." "Is he still working?" "Heart attack." Sarah's voice became flat, matter-of-fact. "He was only 62. I'm sorry. That's tough. It was unexpected. He was in great shape. Or so we thought." Sarah turned back to the window. "Sometimes life changes in an instant, and you realize how little control you really have." The comment carried weight beyond the loss of her father, and Marcus sensed there was more to the story. But he had learned over the years that people shared what they were ready to share, and pushing usually accomplished nothing except making them withdraw. They drove through the town of Copper Falls, a collection of weathered buildings and mobile homes that served the scattered ranching community. Sarah watched the small downtown with interest as they passed the diner, the hardware store, and the post office that seemed to serve as the town's social center. "Do you come here often?" she asked. "Once or twice a month for supplies." "It's not much, but the people are good. They look out for each other." Marcus nodded toward the diner. "Best green chili cheeseburgers in 3 counties, if you believe the locals." "Small towns have their advantages," Sarah said. "Everyone knows everyone else." "True, though that can be a disadvantage too. Privacy is hard to come by when everyone knows your business." Sarah gave him a sharp look. "Is that why you chose to live so far out?" "For privacy?" "Partly. Sometimes you need space to figure out who you are when you're not being who everyone expects you to be." The comment seemed to resonate with Sarah, who nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling." As they continued toward Tucson, Marcus found himself wondering more about Sarah's circumstances. Her clothes were nice but not new, her luggage was minimal, and she traveled without the usual array of electronic devices that most people considered essential. There was something almost deliberately unremarkable about her appearance, as though she were trying not to attract attention.
"Can I ask you something?" Marcus said as they approached the outskirts of Tucson.
Sarah tensed slightly. "Sure. Yesterday, when your car broke down, you were coming from the north. But Denver is northeast of here. Were you taking a really indirect route?" For a moment, Sarah didn't respond. Marcus could see her hands tighten in her lap, and he began to regret asking the question. Then she sighed, a sound filled with resignation. "I wasn't coming from Denver," she said quietly. "I was coming from Las Vegas." "Okay, why did you say Denver?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the sound of the truck's engine. "Because I've been lying to people about where I'm from for the past 6 months. It's become a habit." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Sarah, are you in some kind of trouble?" "It's complicated." Sarah turned to look at him directly for the first time since they had started this conversation. "I'm not a criminal, if that's what you're wondering. I've never hurt anyone or broken any laws. But I am running from something, and I've been using different names and stories to keep people from tracking me." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had invited a stranger into his home, offered to help her, and now discovered that she had been lying about fundamental aspects of her identity. His military training and natural caution screamed warnings, but something about Sarah's manner kept him from immediate alarm. "What are you running from?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "My ex-husband." The words came out flat and emotionless. "He's been trying to find me for 6 months, and he has resources that make it very difficult to stay hidden." Marcus pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to face Sarah completely. "Are we talking about domestic violence?" Sarah nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "Physical, emotional, financial. He controlled every aspect of my life for 8 years. When I finally found the courage to leave, He made it clear that he wasn't going to let me go. Did you go to the police? Sarah's laugh was bitter. My ex-husband is a police detective, a very well-connected police detective with friends in multiple states. The few times I tried to report him, nothing happened. His colleagues always believed his version of events over mine. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, the protective instinct that had served him well in the military. So you've been running for 6 months. I've used 4 different names, lived in 7 different cities, and worked whatever jobs I could find that paid cash. I thought I had lost him in Vegas, but 2 days ago I saw him talking to someone at the hotel where I was staying. I packed everything I owned and left within an hour. And the job interview in Tucson is real. I applied using my real name and credentials because I thought I was far enough away to be safe. I need to work, Marcus. I'm almost out of money and I can't keep running forever. Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, processing what Sarah had told him. The military had taught him to assess threats quickly, and his gut told him that Sarah was telling the truth. Her fear was real, her desperation authentic. But helping her also meant accepting risks he hadn't bargained for. What's your real name? He asked finally. Sarah Martinez is my real name. At least it's my maiden name. I stopped using his name the day I left. And you think he's still looking for you? I know he is. David doesn't give up on anything he considers his property. And that's how he sees me, as something that belongs to him. Marcus started the truck again and pulled back onto the highway. We need to get you to that interview. After that, we'll figure out what comes next. Sarah stared at him in surprise. You're still willing to help me, even after what I told you? Especially after what you told you? Nobody should have to live in fear of someone who's supposed to protect and serve. They drove the rest of the way to Tucson in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Marcus was running scenarios in his head, trying to figure out how to help Sarah while protecting both of them from her ex-husband's reach. Sarah was wrestling with guilt over involving an innocent person in her problems and hoped that maybe, finally, she had found someone who believed her story. The community college where Sarah's interview was scheduled was a modern campus built around courtyards filled with desert landscaping. Marcus dropped her off at the main building and arranged to pick her up in 2 hours. Good luck, he said as she gathered her small portfolio from the truck. Thank you. For everything, Sarah hesitated, then added, if this goes well, I might not need to keep running. If it goes well, we'll celebrate. If it doesn't, we'll figure out another plan. The use of we was not lost on either of them. While Sarah was in her interview, Marcus drove around Tucson, ostensibly shopping for ranch supplies, but actually thinking. He had lived alone for 5 years, keeping his life simple and predictable. Now, in the space of 24 hours, that life had become complicated by a woman whose story sounded like something from a television drama. But Marcus had seen enough of the world to know that truth was often stranger than fiction, and that people in desperate situations sometimes made choices that seemed unthinkable to those who had never faced such desperation. Sarah's story had the ring of truth, and more importantly, her fear was genuine. He was also aware that helping her could put him at risk. If her ex-husband was as connected and determined as she claimed, associating with Sarah could bring unwanted attention from law enforcement. Marcus's military record was clean, and his life since leaving the service had been exemplary, but he knew that didn't always matter when dealing with corrupt cops who had personal agendas. Despite the risks, Marcus found himself unable to simply abandon Sarah to her fate. His grandmother's teachings about helping people in need were deeply ingrained, but beyond that he recognized something in Sarah that resonated with his own experience. They were both people who had been forced to rebuild their lives after circumstances beyond their control had destroyed their previous existence. When Marcus returned to pick up Sarah, he found her waiting outside the building with expression that mixed relief with uncertainty. How did it go? He asked as she climbed into the truck. Better than I expected. They want me to come back for a second interview next week. Sarah fastened her seatbelt and turned to face him. But they want to verify my credentials and check my references. If David has been monitoring those things, we'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, you need a safe place to stay until next week. My offer to remain at the ranch still stands. I can't keep imposing on you. You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. Sarah, you're not imposing. I have a guest room that never gets used, more food than one person can eat, and, honestly, it's been nice having someone to talk to. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. There's something else I need to tell you, something that might change your mind about helping me. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What is it? Yesterday, when we were at your ranch, I saw a car on the road about a mile from your entrance. It was parked under some trees, like someone was watching the property. I didn't think much of it at the time, but this morning I remembered something about that car. What about it? It was the same make and model that David drives, a dark blue sedan with Nevada plates. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. If Sarah's ex-husband had found her at the ranch, then both of them were now in danger. But it also raised questions about how he could have found her so quickly, and whether Sarah was telling him everything about her situation. "Are you sure it was the same car?" Marcus asked. "No, I'm not sure. There are thousands of blue sedans on the road, but David has tracked me down before when I thought I was safe. He seems to know things that he shouldn't be able to know." Marcus drove in silence for several miles, weighing his options. He could take Sarah to a motel in Tucson, give her some money and wish her luck. It would be the safe thing to do, the smart thing to do. Or he could accept that his quiet life was about to become very complicated and commit to helping a woman who might bring serious danger to his doorstep. "We're going back to the ranch," he said finally. "Marcus, if David knows where I am, being around me could be dangerous for you. Maybe. But if he's as determined as you say, you're not going to lose him by staying in motels and using different names. You need a more permanent solution." "What kind of permanent solution?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, formulating a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. "I have some contacts from my military days. People who know how to make problems like your ex-husband go away." Sarah's eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean legally. There are ways to build cases against corrupt cops, ways to expose them that don't involve violence. But it takes time, planning, and evidence. Are you willing to stop running long enough to fight back?" The question hung in the air between them as they drove through the desert toward the ranch. Sarah stared out at the landscape, perhaps seeing it differently now that it might become a battleground rather than just a hiding place. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm tired of being afraid. If you're willing to help me, I'm ready to fight." Neither of them noticed the dark blue sedan that had been following them since they left Tucson, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to track their movements. David Martinez was a patient man when he needed to be, and he had been waiting 6 months for this moment. Now that he had found his wife, he was going to make sure she never ran from him again. The desert evening was approaching. As they neared the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It should have been a peaceful end to a stressful day, but both Marcus and Sarah felt the tension of knowing that their troubles were just beginning. The real test of their unexpected alliance was about to begin. The sound that woke Marcus at 3 a.m. was subtle, the kind of noise that might have been wind or a small animal, but something in his subconscious recognized it as wrong. Years of military service had trained him to sleep lightly, always alert to changes in his environment. He lay still for a moment, listening to the desert night, trying to identify what had disturbed his sleep. Then he heard it again. The soft scrape of metal against wood, coming from the direction of the front porch. Moving carefully to avoid making any noise, Marcus slipped out of bed and pulled on his clothes. He kept a loaded pistol in a lockbox beside his bed, a precaution he had maintained since moving to the remote ranch. As he retrieved the weapon, he heard another sound that made his blood run cold, the quiet click of someone testing the front door handle. Marcus moved silently through the house towards Sarah's room. The guest room door was slightly ajar, and he could see that the bed was empty. For a moment, panic gripped him. Had Sarah left during the night? Had she been taken? Then he noticed that her belongings were still in the room, and he heard the faint sound of movement from the kitchen. He found Sarah crouched beside the kitchen window, peering out through a gap in the curtains. She was fully dressed and held a large knife from his kitchen in her hand. Her face was pale but determined. "How many?" Marcus whispered as he joined her at the window. "I've seen 2 so far," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. "One trying the front door, another checking the windows on the south side. There might be more." Marcus cursed silently. If Sarah's ex-husband had found them, he hadn't come alone. That suggested a level of planning and resources that went beyond a simple domestic dispute. "Is one of them your ex-husband?" "I think so. The build looks right, but I can't see his face clearly." Marcus studied the situation through the window. The men outside were moving with military-style precision, covering each other's movements and systematically checking all possible entry points. These weren't amateur thugs. They were professionals, or at least well-trained. "We need to get out of here," Marcus whispered. "My truck is in the garage, but we'd have to cross open ground to reach it." "There's another option," Sarah said. "Earlier today I noticed a cellar entrance behind the house. If we can get down there, maybe we can hide until they leave." Marcus knew the cellar she meant. It was an old root cellar from the ranch's earlier days, carved into the hillside behind the house. He had reinforced it over the years and used it to store emergency supplies. It might provide temporary shelter, but it could also become a trap if the men outside were thorough in their search. A new sound from the front of the house made the decision for them, the distinctive crack of wood splintering as someone forced the front door. They were out of time. "Move," Marcus whispered, grabbing a flashlight and his emergency bag from a kitchen cabinet. "Stay low and follow me." They slipped out through the kitchen's back door into the cool desert night. The stars provided enough light to navigate by, but also meant they would be visible to anyone watching. Marcus led Sarah along a path he had worn between the house and the various outbuildings, using a storage shed to block their movement from the house. Behind them, they could hear voices and the sound of someone moving through the house, opening doors and checking rooms. A bright flashlight beam swept across the backyard, missing them by only a few feet as they ducked behind a water tank. The cellar entrance was another 50 yards away, cut into the side of a low hill and concealed by desert scrub. Marcus had camouflaged it well over the years, and unless someone knew exactly where to look, it would be difficult to spot even in daylight. They reached the cellar without being detected, and Marcus carefully opened the heavy wooden door that covered the entrance. The space beyond was dark and cool, carved from solid rock and reinforced with concrete. It was larger than it appeared from outside, with shelves lining the walls and enough room for several people to move around comfortably. Marcus closed the door behind them and switched on his flashlight, keeping the beam low to avoid any light seeping out through cracks. The cellar was well stocked with water, canned food, medical supplies, and other emergency items. There were also several weapons, including a rifle and additional ammunition for his pistol. "You prepared for this kind of situation?" Sarah asked, looking around at the supplies. "I prepared for lots of situations. Living this far from help, you learn to be self-sufficient." Marcus checked his watch. "We should be safe here for a while. The question is whether they'll give up and leave or settle in for a longer search." As if in answer to his question, they heard the distant sound of vehicles starting up. Marcus climbed carefully up to the door and listened. The sound seemed to be moving away from the house, but he couldn't be sure if all the intruders were leaving or just some of them. "Stay here," he whispered to Sarah. "I'm going to see what's happening." "That's too dangerous. If they're still out there, we need to know. Besides, I know this property better than they do." Marcus slipped out of the cellar and moved carefully through the darkness toward the house. What he saw made his heart sink. His front door was hanging open, splintered from being forced. Lights were on throughout the house, and he could see signs of a thorough search. Furniture had been moved, drawers pulled out, and papers scattered across the floor. But the most disturbing sight was the man sitting calmly at Marcus's kitchen table, as if he belonged there. The man was in his 40s, with the kind of lean, athletic build that suggested regular physical training. His dark hair was cut short, and he had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He wore civilian clothes, but there was something unmistakably cop-like about his posture and manner. This had to be David Martinez, Sarah's ex-husband. Marcus watched from outside as David methodically went through a stack of papers, apparently Sarah's documents from her purse. He seemed to be in no hurry, confident that he had time to conduct a thorough investigation. After several minutes, David stood and walked through the house, checking each room again. Marcus used the opportunity to circle around to a better vantage point, staying in the shadows cast by his outbuildings. When David returned to the kitchen, he was carrying Marcus's landline phone. He dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. "It's me," David said when the call connected. Marcus could just barely make out his words through the open window. "She was here, but they're both gone now. The house shows signs of a quick departure." "No, I don't think they've gone far. Her stuff is still here, and there's fresh food in the refrigerator. The truck's in the garage, so they're on foot unless they had another vehicle."
Yeah. I want you to set up roadblocks on all the routes out of here.
"They can't have gotten far." Marcus felt a chill as he realized the scope of what they were facing. David wasn't just a corrupt cop. He had enough influence to coordinate roadblocks and organize what amounted to a manhunt. Sarah had been right about his resources and connections. David ended his call and walked to the front window, looking out at the desert landscape. "I know you're out there somewhere, Sarah," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "You can't hide forever. And your new friend just made this his problem too." Marcus backed away from the house and returned to the cellar, his mind racing with possibilities and plans. When he rejoined Sarah, she could tell immediately from his expression that the news was bad. "He's still in the house," Marcus reported, "and he's called for backup. They're setting up roadblocks to prevent us from leaving the area." Sarah closed her eyes and leaned against the cellar wall. "I should never have involved you in this. I should have kept running." "Running wasn't working," Marcus pointed out. "He found you anyway. At least now we know what we're dealing with." "What we're dealing with is a sociopath with a badge and friends in multiple law enforcement agencies. There's no way to fight someone like that." Marcus studied Sarah's face in the dim light of his flashlight. "You said your father was a geologist. Did he ever work for the government?" "Yes, for several years. He did survey work for the Department of Interior." "Why?" "'Cause I'm wondering if there's more to your story than an abusive marriage. Your ex-husband is putting an awful lot of resources into finding you." "That suggests either he's completely obsessed or you have something he needs." Sarah was quiet for a long time, and Marcus could see her wrestling with whether to reveal more of the truth. Finally, she spoke in a voice so low he had to strain to hear her. "Before my father died, he gave me some files. N. Documents related to work he had done for the government 20 years ago. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should keep them safe and never let anyone know I had them." "What kind of documents?" "Geological surveys of an area in Nevada. Location reports for what my father called special mineral deposits. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. It wasn't until after David started trying to track me down that I began to wonder if the files were what he was really after." Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "Where are these files now?" "Hidden in a safety deposit box in Phoenix. I'm the only one who can access it." "And you think David knows about them?" "I think David knows more about my father's work than he ever let on. When we were married, he asked a lot of questions about Dad's career, his contacts, the places he had worked. I thought it was just normal interest in his father-in-law's life, but looking back, he was gathering intelligence." Marcus began pacing the small confines of the cellar. "Sarah, I think you've been caught in the middle of something much bigger than a domestic abuse situation. Those geological surveys your father did, if they identified valuable mineral deposits on government land, that information could be worth millions to the right people." "You think David married me to get access to my father's work?" "I think David married you because someone told him to. And I think your father figured out what was happening before he died." The implications of what Marcus was suggesting hung heavy in the air between them. If he was right, then Sarah's marriage had been a lie from the beginning, orchestrated by people who wanted access to classified government information. Her father's sudden death might not have been natural, and David's pursuit of her was about much more than controlling an ex-wife. "We need to get to Phoenix," Sarah said finally. "If those files are what this is really about, then they're also our only leverage. First, we need to get out of here alive. David may be willing to wait us out, but he won't wait forever." As if summoned by Marcus's words, they heard the sound of footsteps directly overhead. Someone was walking around outside the cellar, close enough that dust drifted down from the wooden door above them. Marcus switched off his flashlight and motioned for Sarah to remain absolutely still. They could hear voices now, muffled but clear enough to make out words. "Check every building." David's voice carried clearly through the ground. "If they're hiding somewhere on this property, I want them found." "What if they made it to the road?" another voice asked. "Then we'll find them there too. But my gut says they're still close. Sarah's not the outdoor type, and she wouldn't last long in the desert without water." The footsteps moved away, but Marcus and Sarah remained frozen in place. They were trapped in the cellar, with limited options and no way to know how long they would have to wait before attempting an escape. "There's something else," Sarah whispered so quietly that Marcus had to lean close to hear her. "Yesterday, when we were driving to Tucson, I called ahead to confirm my interview time. But I also made another call, to a phone number my father gave me. It was supposed to be an emergency contact, someone who could help if I ever needed it." "Did you reach them?" "I got an answering machine. I left a message saying I was Sarah Martinez, that my father was William Torres, and that I needed help. I gave them the number for your landline." Marcus felt a chill of realization. "Sarah, if that number was compromised, or if the wrong people intercepted that message, then I may have led David right to us." The pieces of their predicament were becoming clearer, but the picture they revealed was increasingly grim. They were trapped on Marcus's property by a corrupt law enforcement officer with substantial resources. Sarah possessed information that powerful people wanted, and their attempts to seek help may have actually made their situation worse. But Marcus had survived worse situations during his military service, and he wasn't ready to give up. Somewhere, in the complicated mess of government files, corrupt cops, and hidden mineral deposits, was a solution. They just had to survive long enough to find it. Above them, the search continued, methodical and thorough. Marcus could hear vehicles moving around the property, doors slamming, and the occasional shout as the search teams coordinated their efforts. David Martinez was clearly prepared to spend as much time as necessary to find his quarry. In the darkness of the cellar, Marcus began planning their next move. They had weapons, supplies, and the advantage of knowing the terrain better than their pursuers. They also had something that David wanted badly enough to risk a major law enforcement operation to obtain. The question was whether they could turn those advantages into a way out of their current predicament before David's patience ran out, and he decided to take more drastic measures. The desert had always been Marcus's refuge, but now it was about to become a battlefield. Dawn was breaking over the desert when Marcus finally decided they could risk leaving the cellar. They had spent 4 tense hours underground, listening to the sounds of the search above them, gradually diminish as David's team expanded their efforts to the surrounding area. The last vehicle had driven away an hour ago, but Marcus wanted to be certain before exposing themselves. Sarah emerged from the cellar stiff and exhausted, her face pale from the stress of their ordeal. The morning air felt cold against her skin, after the stuffiness of their underground hiding place, and she took several deep breaths to clear her head. "They're gone, but they'll be back," Marcus said, scanning the horizon for any signs of surveillance. "David left 2 men in the house. I saw them through the window about an hour ago. So, we're still trapped." "Not exactly. I know this land better than anyone, and there are ways to move around that they won't think to watch." Marcus shouldered his emergency pack and checked his weapons. "But first, we need to get some things from one of my storage buildings." They moved carefully across the property, using the natural contours of the land and the placement of buildings to stay hidden from the house. Marcus led Sarah to a metal storage shed that sat near the property's eastern boundary, unlocking it with a key he kept hidden under a rock. The shed contained equipment that surprised Sarah: military-grade communications gear, night vision equipment, and what appeared to be surveillance devices. There were also detailed topographical maps of the surrounding area, marked with various routes and positions. "Marcus, what is all this?" "Insurance," Marcus replied, gathering specific items and packing them into a backpack. "After I got out of the army, I did some consulting work for the government. Security assessments, surveillance operations, that sort of thing. I kept some of the equipment when I retired from that work too." "What kind of consulting?" Marcus paused in his packing to look at Sarah directly. "The kind that involved watching people who might be threats to national security. People who had access to classified information and might be selling it to foreign interests." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You think my father was selling government secrets?" "No. I think your father discovered that someone else was. And that's what got him killed." Marcus finished packing and slung the backpack over his shoulders. "Sarah, those geological surveys you mentioned, if they identified rare earth mineral deposits or uranium ore, that information would be extremely valuable to certain foreign governments. But my father was a patriot. He would never have sold classified information." "I believe you, but someone in the chain of people who had access to his work wasn't as loyal, and I think your father figured out who it was before he died." They left the storage shed and began moving toward the eastern edge of Marcus's property. He had a specific destination in mind: a high ridge about 2 miles away that would provide excellent observation of the surrounding area, while remaining hidden from anyone watching the ranch house. As they walked, Marcus explained his theory about what had really happened to Sarah's father and why David had pursued her so relentlessly. 20 years ago, your father did geological surveys that identified valuable mineral deposits on government land. That information was classified because the deposits were strategically important, but someone with access to those surveys began selling the information to mining companies or foreign interests. And you think David was part of this conspiracy? I think David was recruited by whoever was running the operation. His job was to marry you, gain access to your father's files and contacts, and provide ongoing intelligence about government investigations. Sarah stopped walking and stared at Marcus. "You're saying my entire marriage was a lie?" "I'm saying it's a possibility we need to consider. The level of resources David is using to find you suggests this is about much more than a personal vendetta." They reached the ridge as the sun climbed higher in the desert sky. Marcus used his binoculars to survey the area around his ranch, counting vehicles and trying to identify the positions of David's team. What he saw confirmed his suspicions about the scope of the operation they were facing. There are at least 8 men down there, Marcus reported. 2 in the house, 2 watching the road, and 4 others positioned around the property perimeter. They also have communications equipment set up, which means they're coordinating with people outside the immediate area. Sarah took the binoculars and looked for herself. The sight of so many armed men surrounding what had been her sanctuary was deeply unsettling. They looked professional.
They are professional.
This isn't a local police operation, Sarah. David has called in federal resources, which means he's convinced someone in Washington that you're a threat to national security. But I'm not. I don't even know what's in those files my father left me. That's exactly why we need to get to Phoenix and retrieve them. Those documents are the only proof we have of what really happened, and they're our only leverage for getting out of this situation. Marcus began setting up some of his surveillance equipment, using the elevation of the ridge to establish communication intercepts and visual monitoring of the search below. As he worked, Sarah found herself grappling with the possibility that everything she had believed about her life was false. If what you're saying is true, she said finally, then David killed my father. It's possible. A 62-year-old man in good health doesn't usually die of a sudden heart attack, unless there's an underlying cause. There are drugs that can simulate cardiac arrest and leave no traces if the autopsy isn't thorough enough. Sarah sat down on a rock and put her head in her hands.
I can't believe I was so blind.
There were signs, things that didn't make sense, but I ignored them because I wanted to believe I was in love. Don't blame yourself. These people are professionals at deception. If they targeted you, they would have made sure the deception was convincing. Marcus finished setting up his equipment and began monitoring the radio communications from David's team. What he heard confirmed his worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy they were facing. Base, this is Martinez. David's voice came through clearly on the scanner. We've completed the initial search of the property. No signs of the subjects, but they couldn't have gone far on foot. Copy that, Martinez. What's your assessment? I think they're still in the area. The woman has information we need, and she's not going to abandon it. I recommend we establish a wider perimeter and wait them out. Negative. We can't maintain this operation much longer without drawing attention. You have 12 hours to locate the subjects and secure the materials. And if we can't locate them, then we move to contingency plan B. The national security implications are too important to let them escape with classified information. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Contingency plan B in operations like this usually meant eliminating witnesses and covering up the entire situation. If they couldn't capture Sarah and retrieve her father's files, David's handlers would likely order both of them killed. We're running out of time, Marcus told Sarah. They're under pressure from their superiors to wrap this up quickly. Then we need to get to Phoenix now. But how? They had the roads blocked, and we're on foot in the middle of the desert. Marcus had been thinking about that problem since they reached the ridge. There's an old mining road about 5 miles north of here. It connects to the highway system, but it's rough enough that they probably won't think to watch it. If we can reach it, we might be able to flag down a passing truck. 5 miles through the desert in this heat? It won't be easy, but it's our best option. We'll travel during the cooler parts of the day and rest during the hottest hours. As they prepared to leave their observation post, Marcus intercepted another radio transmission that made their situation even more urgent. All units, be advised that we have confirmation that the subjects made contact with an unknown party yesterday. We're treating this as a potential intelligence breach. Priority is now capture or elimination. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. The phone call I made yesterday to my father's emergency contact. They know about it, which means they may also know who you called. Sarah, if your father's contact was legitimate, they're probably in danger too. The weight of responsibility for endangering others was almost more than Sarah could bear. Her desperate attempt to escape an abusive marriage had mushroomed into a situation that threatened multiple lives and potentially national security.
We have to warn them, she said.
First, we have to survive. We can't help anyone if we're dead. They began their trek across the desert, using Marcus's military training to move tactically and avoid detection. The sun was climbing toward its zenith, and the temperature was already becoming uncomfortable. By afternoon, it would be dangerous to travel in the open. After 2 hours of difficult hiking across rocky terrain, they reached an abandoned mining camp that Marcus knew about from his explorations of the area. The old buildings provided shelter from the sun and concealment from any aerial surveillance David's team might be using. While they rested in the shade of a collapsing wooden structure, Sarah finally asked the question that had been bothering her since Marcus revealed his background. Marcus, how do I know you're not part of this conspiracy? How do I know you weren't assigned to watch me just like David was? The question hurt, but Marcus understood why she had to ask it. Sarah's entire world had been built on lies, and trust was now a luxury she couldn't afford. You don't know, Marcus admitted, but consider this. If I were working with David, why would I have helped you escape? Why would I be hiding in an abandoned mine instead of drinking coffee in my kitchen while his team searches for you? Maybe you're playing a longer game. Maybe your job is to gain my trust, so I'll lead you to my father's files. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's possible. But Sarah, if that were the case, you'd already be dead. The people behind this operation don't hesitate to eliminate problems, and keeping you alive would be a necessary risk if they already had what they needed. The logic was sound, but Sarah's ability to trust had been so thoroughly destroyed that logic wasn't enough. She studied Marcus's face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that he was not what he seemed to be. What she saw was a man who was genuinely committed to helping her, despite the personal risk. His military bearing and tactical skills were real, but so was his anger at the corruption they were facing. Most importantly, he could have turned her over to David at any point and chosen the safe path. I want to believe you, Sarah said finally. But I've been wrong about people before. I understand. But right now, I'm the best option you have. We can sort out trust issues after we survive this. They spent the afternoon hours sheltering from the desert heat, taking turns keeping watch and planning their next moves. Marcus used his communication equipment to monitor David's team, learning that the search was expanding but had not yet identified their trail. As evening approached and the temperature began to drop, they resumed their journey toward the old mining road. The terrain was treacherous in the fading light, with loose rocks and hidden crevices that could easily cause a twisted ankle or worse. They were within a mile of their destination when Marcus spotted the headlights of a vehicle moving along the mining road. For a moment, hope flared that they had reached safety. Then Marcus used his binoculars to get a better look at the vehicle, and cursed under his breath. It's one of David's teams, he told Sarah. They did think to watch the mining road after all. Their escape route was blocked, and they were running out of options. Behind them, David's search teams were systematically working their way across the desert. Ahead of them, roadblocks prevented any attempt to reach the highway system. But Marcus had one more card to play. A contact from his government consulting days who might be willing to help despite the risks. The question was whether they could survive long enough to make contact, and whether his old colleague would believe their story about corruption and conspiracy. As the desert night settled around them, Marcus and Sarah found themselves trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. The next few hours would determine whether they lived to expose the truth about Sarah's father's death and the conspiracy that had destroyed her life, or whether they would become two more casualties in a cover-up that reached to the highest levels of government. The hunter had become the hunted, but the prey was not going down without a fight. The abandoned copper mine that Marcus led Sarah to in the darkness was a relic from Arizona's mining boom, its entrance hidden by decades of desert growth and carefully forgotten by most maps. Marcus had discovered it during his early years at the ranch, when exploring the remote corners of his property had been a way to deal with the silence left by his failed marriage.
This goes back about 200 feet, Marcus explained as they squeezed through the narrow entrance.
It's been abandoned for 60 years, but it's structurally sound and completely hidden from aerial surveillance. Sarah followed him into the cool darkness, grateful to be out of the desert night wind that had turned surprisingly cold. Marcus switched on his flashlight, revealing a tunnel carved from solid rock that opened into a larger chamber about 50 feet in. We can rest here safely, Marcus said, setting down his pack. But more importantly, we can make contact with the outside world without David's team intercepting our communications. The mineshaft provided natural shielding from radio frequency detection, which meant Marcus could use his equipment without fear of giving away their position. He began setting up a portable communication system while Sarah explored their temporary refuge. Marcus, Sarah said from deeper in the mine, there's something back here you need to see. Marcus joined her at the rear of the chamber, where his flashlight revealed something that shouldn't have existed in an abandoned copper mine. Recent excavation work. Someone had been digging new tunnels within the past few months, and the work looked professional rather than amateur. This isn't random treasure hunting, Marcus observed, examining the precision of the excavation. Someone with proper equipment and geological knowledge has been working back here. Sarah studied the excavation more carefully, her father's training allowing her to recognize the signs of systematic mineral exploration. Marcus, this looks like someone was following specific geological indicators. They weren't mining randomly, they knew exactly what they were looking for. The implications hit both of them at the same time. They had taken refuge in a mine that was connected to the same conspiracy that had destroyed Sarah's life and killed her father. "Your father's geological surveys," Marcus said. "They identified mineral deposits in this area. And someone has been using his work to locate and extract them illegally." Sarah's voice was filled with anger and grief. "My father spent his life serving his country, and these people used his work to steal from it." Marcus's communication equipment came online, and he immediately began attempting to contact his former colleague in the government. Colonel James Wright had been Marcus's commanding officer during his final years of military service, and one of the few people Marcus trusted completely. After several attempts, Marcus managed to establish contact with Wright's secure line. "Right here," came the familiar gravelly voice through the static. "Colonel, it's Marcus Thompson. I need help, and I need it fast." There was a pause before Wright responded. "Marcus? Jesus, where are you? There's been chatter all day about a manhunt in your area. Something about stolen classified documents and terrorist connections. That's bullshit, Colonel, and you know it. I've got a woman with me whose father was a government geologist. She's being hunted by corrupt law enforcement officers who want classified geological surveys that her father left her." "Slow down, Marcus. Start from the beginning." Marcus quickly explained the situation, from Sarah's appearance at his ranch to their current predicament in the abandoned mine. He described the evidence they had found of illegal mining operations and his theory about the conspiracy behind Sarah's father's death. Wright listened without interruption, then was quiet for several minutes before responding. "Marcus, the story you're telling me matches intelligence we've been developing about a mineral extraction conspiracy. We've suspected for months that someone was using classified geological data to identify and exploit government mineral reserves. Then you believe us?" "I believe you, but the situation is more complicated than you know. The operation you've stumbled into involves high-level corruption in multiple agencies. If I try to help you through normal channels, the wrong people will know about it within hours." Sarah leaned close to the radio. "Colonel Wright, my name is Sarah Martinez. My father was William Torres, and before he died, he told me that if I ever needed help, I should contact someone with your organization." Another long pause. "Sarah, your father contacted us 6 months before he died. He believed he had identified the source of information leaks related to his geological work, and he was trying to gather evidence. What happened to that evidence? We assumed it died with him. But if he left materials with you, those documents could be the proof we need to expose the entire conspiracy." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "Colonel, can you get us out of this situation? David Martinez has federal resources supporting him, and they're under orders to eliminate us if they can't capture us." David Martinez is DEA, officially assigned to drug interdiction operations along the Mexican border. Unofficially, he's been working for a group that's been selling classified information to foreign mining interests. We've been building a case against him for months. Then arrest him. We can't move yet. Martinez is small time compared to the people giving him orders. If we arrest him now, the big fish will disappear, and we'll never be able to prove the full extent of the conspiracy. Sarah grabbed the radio microphone. "Colonel, they're going to kill us. Whatever case you're building, it won't matter if we're dead. I understand the urgency, Sarah. Here's what I can do. I can arrange for an extraction team to get you out of there. But you'll have to reach a specific location where they can pick you up safely." "Where?" "There's an old airstrip about 15 miles northeast of Marcus's ranch. It was used for smuggling operations in the past, but we've had it under surveillance. My team can meet you there at dawn." Marcus studied his maps, locating the airstrip Wright described. Getting there would require crossing open desert during the dangerous pre-dawn hours, but it was their best chance of survival. "We'll be there," Marcus promised. "Marcus, there's one more thing." Sarah's father didn't just leave geological surveys. He left detailed records of everyone who had access to his work, including communications that proved the conspiracy reaches to very high levels of government. Those records are what David is really after. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "My father knew he was in danger, didn't he? He knew, and he tried to protect both his country and his daughter. The safety deposit box in Phoenix contains more than geological surveys, Sarah. It contains the evidence needed to bring down a conspiracy that's been selling American strategic resources to foreign interests for over 20 years. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but it also provided Sarah with something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Her father hadn't just been killed to silence him. He had been murdered to prevent the exposure of treason at the highest levels. "We'll get those documents," Sarah said firmly. "But Colonel, I want your word. that the people responsible for my father's death will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You have it, Sarah. But first, we need to get you out of this alive. After ending their communication with Colonel Wright, Marcus and Sarah spent the remaining hours before dawn preparing for what would be their most dangerous journey yet. Crossing 15 miles of desert while avoiding David's search teams would require all of Marcus's military training and a considerable amount of luck. As they prepared to leave the mine, Sarah made a discovery that provided the final piece of the puzzle. Wedged behind a rock near the recent excavation was a piece of paper with her father's handwriting on it. "It's a note," she told Marcus, holding the paper in the beam of his flashlight. "Dad was here. He knew about this mine." The note was brief but devastating in its implications. The Phoenix files contained proof of systematic theft of strategic minerals from government land. David Martinez is a key operative in the conspiracy. If something happens to me, Sarah must be protected at all costs. The evidence I've gathered will expose treason at the cabinet level. Marcus whistled softly. Cabinet level. No wonder they're willing to kill to keep this quiet. My father came here to document their illegal mining operation, Sarah realized. He knew they were using his surveys to steal government resources, and he was gathering evidence to prove it, which means they killed him not just to silence him, but because he had already collected proof of their crimes. They left the mine as the eastern sky began to show the first hints of dawn. The 15-mile journey to the airstrip would take them across some of the most inhospitable terrain in Arizona, but Marcus knew the country well and had a route planned that would minimize their exposure to David's search teams. The first 10 miles went smoothly, with Marcus using his knowledge of the landscape to keep them hidden in washes and behind rock formations. But as they approached the final stretch to the airstrip, they encountered a problem that threatened to destroy their hopes of rescue. A helicopter was circling the airstrip, and vehicles were positioned around its perimeter. David's team had anticipated Wright's extraction plan and moved to block it. "They're waiting for us," Marcus observed through his binoculars. "Then we're trapped." "Not yet. Wright's people are professionals. They wouldn't choose an extraction point without having contingency plans." As if summoned by Marcus's words, his radio crackled to life. "Desert Fox, this is Eagle 1. We have eyes on the reception committee. Are you in position for alternative pickup?" Marcus keyed his radio. "Eagle 1? We're about a mile southwest of the primary site. We can see your uninvited guests." "Copy that. We're going to create a distraction at the primary site. When you see fireworks, move to coordinates 32.7749 north, 110.8651 west. We'll have a bird waiting." Marcus quickly plotted the new coordinates on his map. The location was a flat area about 3 miles from their current position, far enough from the airstrip that David's team wouldn't be expecting it. "Sarah, we're going to get one chance at this. When Wright's people create their distraction, we need to move fast and get to the new pickup point." They didn't have to wait long. At exactly dawn, explosions erupted at several points around the airstrip, followed by the sound of automatic weapons fire. David's helicopter immediately moved to investigate the disturbances, and his ground teams began repositioning to respond to what they believed was an assault on their positions. Marcus and Sarah used the chaos to move quickly across the open ground toward the alternative extraction point. Behind them, the sounds of the firefight continued, with Wright's team obviously committed to keeping David's forces busy. They reached the extraction coordinates just as a military helicopter appeared over the horizon, flying low and fast. The aircraft touched down only long enough for Marcus and Sarah to climb aboard before lifting off again and heading west toward Phoenix. As they flew away from the desert that had been both sanctuary and battleground, Sarah looked down at the landscape where her life had been forever changed. Somewhere below, David Martinez was probably realizing that his quarry had escaped and that his conspiracy was about to be exposed. Colonel Wright was waiting for them at a secure facility in Phoenix, along with a team of investigators who would need Sarah's testimony and access to her father's hidden evidence. The safety deposit box that had been the focus of so much violence contained not just geological surveys, but detailed documentation of a conspiracy that had stolen millions of dollars worth of strategic minerals from American soil. Within 48 hours, arrests were being made at multiple levels of government, and David Martinez was in federal custody facing charges of treason, murder, and conspiracy. The woman he had hunted so relentlessly across the desert had become the instrument of his downfall. Sarah's nightmare was over, but her real work was just beginning. Her father's legacy would be the exposure of one of the most significant security breaches in modern American history, and she would spend the coming months testifying before Congress and grand juries. Marcus returned to his ranch, where he found that the desert silence he had once cherished now seemed incomplete without the sound of intelligent conversation and unexpected laughter. When Sarah called a few weeks later to tell him that the community college in Tucson had offered her a permanent position, he wasn't surprised to find himself suggesting that she might want to consider living somewhere with more space and fewer neighbors. The solitary rancher had discovered that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to help someone else find their way home. And sometimes, the strangers who appear on your doorstep turn out to be exactly the people you've been waiting your whole life to meet. The desert keeps its secrets well, but occasionally, it gives up treasures more valuable than any mineral deposit. The chance for two damaged people to heal each other, and the opportunity to transform a chance encounter into a love story that began with a broken-down car and evolved into something strong enough to survive government conspiracies and desert warfare. In the end, the most unexpected thing that happened when Marcus Thompson encountered a stranger on a dusty road was not the danger they faced or the conspiracy they exposed, but the discovery that loneliness is a choice and that home is not a place but a person willing to share both the storms and the silence.